and thank you for being here today. My name is Gerald Newman, and I'm the director of the Human Rights Program. And we're here to talk about state fragility and the future of human rights in the Sahel region. This is the first of a series of varied events we're going to be having this year. As you know, we are living in unsettled times. From a human rights perspective, the United States is less inclined to play a constructive role in the world generally, and has less of a focus on Africa. The Human Rights Program will continue to maintain its focus on Africa. With that in mind, I feel especially privileged to welcome today a very distinguished human rights expert with a long career, Ibrahima Kane. Currently, he is an economic rights researcher at Gaston Berger University in Senegal. Among other things, previously, he led the African Union Advocacy Program at the Open Society Foundation Africa, and before that, led the Africa Program at Interrights, among other distinguished contributions. He will be discussing the issues with HRP's Associate Director, Abadir Ibrahim, who I think needs no introduction in this audience. So I will leave things in your capable hands. I'll leave the mic in your capable hands.
Thank you, Jerry.
Step to the back.
All right, thank you, Professor Newman. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I would also thank you, Ibrahima, for joining us and coming all this way to join us in this conversation. Before we start, I want to thank the Program on Law, Society, and the Muslim World for co-sponsoring this event. Advocates for Human Rights, thank you for sponsoring this event. And also Harvard African Law Association, HALA, thank you for co-sponsoring this event. And let's start with Ibrahima. Ibrahima will provide us a prompt of about 15-20 minutes. And then I will engage Ibrahima in a conversation and basically include everyone in a conversation. So why don't we start off with you, Ibrahima?
Thank you. Good, I don't know, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. My name is Ibrahima Kane. I'm a Senegalese lawyer, so a Francophone lawyer. So forgive the broken English I will be using. And I'm really happy and privileged to be with you today. Thanks to Abadir for inviting me to discuss the situation in the Sahel. I don't know if any of you know where the Sahel is on the globe. The Sahel region is the region that is just below the Sahara and before the forest that we have in Africa. It starts from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea in Sudan. It's a very big region. It's the region that has, in his own history, experienced a lot of states, particularly two big empires, which maybe you know, the Mali Empire, that many of you know, but also the Songhai Empire that succeeded the Mali Empire. This is the region of the continent that experienced the first construction of states. In year 1235, the Mali Empire had a constitution that we call that the Kourougan-Fouga Constitution. Kourougan-Fouga is the place where this constitution was adopted. And if you look at the date, it's before the Magna Carta treaty that created the rule of law. This constitution is not well known by people, but it is not just about structuring a state, which is the Mali Empire, but also creating norms that will protect citizens in in that empire, because in addition to the Kuruganfuga Charter, they adopted what we can call the oath of the hunters. You know, in that community at that time, hunters were the more respected people. They are the one going find animals and come to the community. And hunters adopted a document, a oath, on how they should be treating human beings. And when you read the information that we got from on those issues came from the griots. In that part of the world, information were gathered by generation of griots. And up to now, we have those people who can tell you about the history of the region. And when you, the information that we gathered about the oath of the hunters shows you that it's not just about collective rights that people used to say, it's also about individual rights. You cannot shoot a person in a particular context. Foreigners has to be protected in the community. Women had rights. If you read a book written by a well-known American scholar, Gomez, it's called The Dominion. He talks about the role of women in the designation of the king in the Mali Empire, which gives you an idea of it. So such empires also had a distinctive role of managing diversity. You know, we had many ethnic groups. How do you make sure those ethnic groups continue to be together, to live together, and what kind of system do you put in place to make sure they always live together? You know, the system that was set up at that time still continues in our ears to organize the life of people in our region. Just to give you one example, in the southern part of Senegal, we were facing a kind of insurgency. You know, there was rebel groups that claimed the independence of the region called Casamance. And those rebel groups were just saying that Casamance belonged to people from Casamance, and those who are coming from the north, which is the rest of Senegal, are not welcome. The government, knowing that the population in Casamance has special relationship with some ethnic groups in the northern part of Senegal, decided, since the insurgency started, to nominate only people from those communities in the southern part of Senegal. They've never been attacked, despite the fact that they were against the state. No single institution was attacked, simply because at the head of those institutions, you have people coming from a special community, and that community had special relationship with their ethnic groups. And this goes for centuries. And they didn't want to really cut that kind of relationship simply because they want to have their own independence. It tells you about the importance of the way we were managing our diversity. So, look at that kind of example of empires that I was describing and take it today in the same region. After, of course, the hand of those empires, the slavery, the type of slavery that I'm talking about is slavery from Africa to this part of the world, colonization, all those systems that existed completely destroy the state that we had in the past. And in the 60s, of course, after the Second World War and its consequences, the colonial system that we had, led by the French, the British, the Spanish, and the Portuguese, finally decided to give us independence. But they gave us independence through states that we had, they knew from the beginning that they were completely fragile. Completely fragile. And through those systems, we got governments, statements that were also so well connected with the former colonial master that they managed the state on behalf of the colonial master, if I can put it in that way, until the fall of the Berlin Wall, where we were obliged, as all the different parts of the world, to democratize our societies. And in democratizing our society, to have new norms, new rules that was supposed to better protect human life and dignity in our region. Have they succeeded? I don't know for other regions of the continent, but for the Sahel region, no. Today, as we are talking, this region is almost collapsing. You have 3 countries since 15 years are struggling with what we call terrorism. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria with Boko Haram. They are really struggling to deal with terrorism. That, as I will try to explain to you, you have different way of seeing terrorism. There is a Western definition of terrorism, anything associated with Al-Qaeda, with other things, but you also have a very easy way of connecting the situation in your country with that for our leaders so that they can get support from the Western world. And what is happening, despite the fact that today the French, the British, the American, all the Western countries were kicked out from our region, we still have the so-called terrorism still affecting our countries, and is still today, for instance, Mali, traveling from one city to another, one big city to another one, it's not even possible. In Burkina Faso, going from the capital city to the village, as you usually do every weekend, it's not possible. The state cannot control 100 kilometers out of the capital city. In Burkina Faso, for instance, the last 15 years, 8,000 schools were closed. 8,000 schools, 15 years. It means that 2 or 3 generations of our citizens will not be citizens because never go to school, never had a chance to understand even the world within which they are living. And I could go on and on explaining the situation in the country. But these states that I'm talking about are the same state when you look at their credential in terms of human rights treaty ratification and other. They are the best. When you look at the ratification of AU treaties, the first country that comes in mind when you look at the ratification is Mali, followed by Burkina Faso, even Niger. African countries, just in trying to make sure that cases are not going to the African court, the mechanism that they created, introduced this mechanism under Article 34.6, meaning that if you want to file a case against a state, that state has to make a declaration accepting cases from individuals and NGOs. And when you look at from the 8 countries today that have ratified, that have made that declaration, 6 of them are coming from West Africa. So meaning that we have states that are well committed to the protection of human rights, but states that are unable to perform their obligation under these human rights treaties. So why are we in such complex situation? Why the state that we inherited from the colonial system is not able to really perform? I think there are many, many, many challenges. Let me start by one of the first challenges that you cannot attribute to the state itself, which is the drought, the climate. You know, since the 70s, any of you were born, this part of the world is facing a big challenge in having water every year. And if you don't get water every year during the rainy season, you cannot get water for the river, you cannot get water for, you know, people getting crops and everything. Since 1970, in the 1970 up to now, you know, for example, the space that you could use for agriculture has diminished a third in the Sahel region. This is why now you have people who are doing pastoralism, moving from one place to another one, going south through the forest to find grass for their animals. And that creates problems between, you know, pastoralists and those who are doing agriculture. The situation that is happening in Nigeria, the situation that is happening in Niger, in Mali, is partly due to that crisis. And now it's even getting worse with all the climate change issues that you have. State cannot really say what they can do to stop that conflict between pastoralists and people who are doing agriculture, and it's worsening. That's the first challenge. The second challenge, which can be attributed to our leaders, is the mismanagement of our countries. We have, West Africa is a region where there are countries that we can call geological scandals. Country like Guinea-Conakry, because they have all the resources that we want in the world. Everything that you think of. There are two countries in Africa that have all of them, the DRC and Guinea-Conakry. Gold, the Mali Empire was known for the gold. Many, many other important critical minerals that we call them now are in that region, despite the fact that they have them, but the economy is not moving, simply because people are taking those minerals, not transforming them in the country, but going and transforming them in the Western world. So the job creation is not in the region, but the job creation is in the Western. So that situation and corruption and all other situation is, in my view, one of the big elements that explain the fragility of our states. Because you don't have the resources to maintain an army, to maintain a police, you know, to have good health for the population, education, you know, all those minimal things that a state has an obligation to do. They can't do it simply because they don't have the resources, because of the mismanagement. The third element that I would like to highlight here, which is also very, very important, is this is the region of all the discrimination that you can believe exists in the world. The first kind of discrimination is the discrimination between the younger generation and the old generation. My fellow Africans know what I'm saying, because if you are young, you cannot say anything. You need to belong to a level above to have something to say. And our young generation of tweet, of internet, of all this, they also want to have their space. It creates a second problem. This is the region where women don't have anything to say in the community because of the social position that are given to them. You know, and sometimes that position is even supported by the judicial system. Just a few years ago in Mali, the Supreme Court of Mali, looking at a case where a family in the central part of Mali, where the lands are very useful for agriculture, these three women went to court because they didn't have a brother. They were the only people who inherited from their father, but the community say they can't inherit land because they are women. In a country where the constitution talk about equality between men and women. They decided to go to court. They went to the first, second, up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court say that because of the community system, the appeal court is right by not giving them the land because they need to apply the tradition in a country where the constitution says people are equal. So just give you.
Ibrahima, let me give you three more
Yes.
minutes.
Yeah. And the last one about the inequalities is an inequality based on the work that you do, and inequality based on the work that you are asked to do. Slavery still exists in that region at the very, very high level. And you have also the caste system. And the caste system is, I don't want to describe it in a way, but sometimes people cannot even be buried in the same cemetery. And these people are Muslim, huh? But the social construct in the society is more important than the religious rules that we have. This is also the region. So, a state that is not performing, a state, even the boundaries of the state, we don't know them, because according to the African Union, only 18%, 18% of African borders are demarcated. I come from a country that has 5 neighbors. Only, we are 60 years, 65 years independence. Eh? Only one country, Senegal and Mali, have their border demarcated. Meaning that at any moment, you can have crisis. No, if you look at the cases, African cases before the ICJ, International Court of Justice, they are mainly cases on, border demarcation. So all this, to give you a sense that, and I don't want to go about the judiciary because the judiciary is even the more complex, because the judicial system that we have is a judicial system that we inherited from our colonial system. And because of all the problems that I mentioned to you, the lack of buildings, the lack of lawyers, the lack of judges. In my country, we are 20 million of citizens. We only have 500 judges and 500 lawyers. There are places where you cannot even find a lawyer. And according to our law, any person who is arrested can refuse to talk before if the lawyer is not in place. So that tells you about the difficulty even implementing our legislation. So in that particular context, now how do we protect human rights? Very difficult question. But we have also in our architecture system, we have regional and continental human rights mechanisms. They should play an important role. The African Commission, the African Court, the Committee on the Right and Welfare of the Child. And all these bodies were also created because African countries were not convinced on the universality of the norms that protect us. Just one example, and I will finish with that, about the universality of the norm. When the Convention of the Right of the Child were being developed, more than 50 African countries were independent. Only 4 African countries were associated for the development of that treaty. And it was under the UN system. What happened? 1989, the UN Convention is adopted. 1990, African countries decided to have their own system because they don't believe that what was adopted in New York was reflecting the reality of the world. Definition of the child soldiers, children in some difficult situation, FGM and other, were not taken into consideration in the treaty. So they wanted to have their own system. So that also adds another layer to the difficulty of protecting human rights. Don't believe that everything is black, everything is dark, but this is the condition within which people are trying now to find a way in protecting human rights and human dignity. It's done with a lot of difficulty, but it's done. It's done. And sometimes we manage to find solutions to certain situations that have never been sorted out in many other regions. Just give last point, and definitely this time I will stop. There was a case, I was involved in the case in Sudan, where Sudan, was one country. The country was split into 2, and a girl whose father was a police officer in Sudan decided that she wants to go to school. But when she wanted to go to the university, the country was divided. She was Sudanese, the country was one. And now, because of her name, Benjamin sounds south, not north, she was prevented from going to school, to the university. Or if she wanted to go to the university, she has to pay $6,000 because the country was under sanction, and she could not be at the same level as Sudanese. We took the matter to the African Commission. And this question of nationality was raised, despite the fact that her mom was Sudanese. Her mom's nationality was not questioned. But at that time, Sudan law couldn't allow a woman to give her nationality to her children. So the only way was her father. But we managed with the Committee on the Right and Welfare of the Child to use some of the development that happened at the UN system, because there was discussion at the UN system on the nationality of person in the context of separation of states. And we used those norms, which were accepted by the committee, to really make sure that that young woman, Benjamin, nationality was accepted as a Sudanese, not as a South Sudanese, because she was never a South Sudanese, even if her name sounds South Sudanese. So that gives you a hope that the system can also work if you use him in a very efficient manner, and if you try. And I could tell you many, many other things, and about the African Commission, where despite the fact that there was no right to a nationality in the African Charter, people's right to a nationality were accepted by the African Commission using other provision of the African Charter to make that the protection of that right possible. So the system that we have, despite the fragile state, the hope is that also the region can help at least to protect the right that the national system is not able to do. That's a small hope, but as we know, and I will conclude with that, human right is only protected if the state is able to really be obliged by the obligation that it accepted as a state. So a fragile state is not a state that is able to protect the rights. So what we really need to do, in my view, is to use everything to strengthen the capacity of a state to be able to uphold its obligation and to play an important role in the protection of human life and dignity. If that is not done, even if we use the mechanism at the regional level, yes, they can help, but the main, in my view, the main action to be taken when it's come to human rights is to do it at the national level. It's at the national level. If the system at the national level is well efficient, then we can protect, we can say there is possibility, there is capacity to protect the human rights. If it's not, it will be difficult to do something about it. So those are the elements that I just wanted to put forward.
Thank you, Ibrahima. I had a couple of preset questions, but given that I think I ceded my time to you, let me say one thing and then maybe take questions from the room. And if we don't have questions, if I get an opportunity, I'll ask the questions I had. So this is interesting to me as someone whose experience and practice is based on East Africa and Ethiopia, which is a different context. But I can relate to some of the things that you said in terms of the institutions and norms that predate the state. And then the Ethiopian setting, this is a controversial issue, but the state, you could say, is survived colonialism. But then when you have a strong state also, that spins its own difficult challenges. And even with a strong state, that in Ethiopia, we're currently having similar issues in terms of state fragility. But even when we had a strong state, there is also a context in which you had pre-modern normative systems pre-existing with the modern system. And where you also had to navigate as a lawyer, you have a certain legal training in which you expect legal systems, institutions, governments to operate a certain way, but where there's no rule of law, there's a certain sense of improvisation and the rules being different every time. So you're always constantly innovating your strategies. With the fragile state context, you even have a really different setting. I will come back and ask questions, but let me give the mic to the room and take questions from the room.
I can talk loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Marissa.
Since we have online audiences as well, let me give you the mic.
Hi, I'm Larissa. I really appreciated how you brought up how a lot of the Sahel states are willing to engage in regional African justice mechanisms. But I do want to ask a question because a few hours ago, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso decided to step out of the ICC, viewing it as a form of neo-colonial justice, which I mean, they're not wrong, but yeah, how do you reconcile with that? What do you view as the ultimate form of justice? Do you think that it should be on a regional level, or do you think that these countries should also be engaging with these international justice mechanisms as well? Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts because this is such a breaking news issue right now.
Do you want to take questions? Okay, so do you want to take a couple of questions?
Yeah, let me take.
I'll add to your question and say, how about regional institutions? What does an effective regional mechanism look like in terms of a state, especially dealing with a fragile state context?
Hi, my name is Endem. You mentioned earlier the large amount of ethnic groups in West African countries that conflict with each other. Even in Nigeria, we have a lot of ethnic groups like the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Hausa that conflict. How do you go about resolving those conflicts to where they focus more on unifying as a nation rather than focusing on each tribal conflict and each tribal interest they have for themselves?
Okay, so let me, there is one.
Hi, my name is Rose. So I also wanted to ask about institution, not regional, but more sub-regional. So like the role of ECOWAS, how does that interact with the politics between the three countries? And then since you're from Senegal, I have to ask you about your first president, Senghor, and how he thought about differences and ethnicities. He was more open to them not being necessarily national. So is there a way of thinking about this that transcends the national? And since we're dealing with a belt, the Sahel belt, maybe it's something that is transnational and therefore requires transnational capabilities.
Okay, so let me first try to respond to your question. You know, the issue that you are raising, if Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, within what they call now IOS, have decided to leave the ICC, it's not something new. Few years before, African countries, in their majority, decided to have their own system, which is a criminal system that will deal with the most serious crime as the ICC, because they felt at that time that ICC was designed to deal with African leaders, simply because no other situation in the world, and only God knows how many, could be taken to The Hague. No single cases was taken to The Hague. Only African issues were taken to The Hague. And even forgetting that for some of those cases that were taken to The Hague, they were taken by African countries, like Uganda took the matter of Kony to the ICC. I think we need to look at the ICC issue in a different aspect. The first aspect is that when ICC was created, and particularly under the leadership of his first prosecutor, the Argentinian lawyer, he targeted head of states. And when you target the leaders, there is a kind of unanimity among themselves to protect their own leadership. And that's why the reaction was so heavy. And there was even a kind of disconnection between our leaders and the people, because there were many NGOs, many organizations that wanted to take some of these issues at the ICC. But the way the cases were chosen was also another problem by itself. For instance, you had a situation, you know, the ICC treaty, the Rome Statute, still have some gray zone. For example, how do you try a leader? There is a very, very big difference between the way ICC operate and the way International Court of Justice operate. If you look at the Euroja case at the ICC, at the International Court of Justice, it's clear that people holding some very senior position, not saying they cannot be tried, but while they are holding their position, they cannot be prosecuted.
Do you think that's a weakness of the Malabo Protocol, though? That you can't try heads of state right now?
Oh yes, the Malabo Protocol was made by African countries, but the Malabo Protocol reflects that situation. You know, even for the difficulty that we have at the moment, we don't, the neither the ICC nor the ICJ have made a pronouncement on that particular issue. Because the Euroja case was a very peculiar one. A foreign minister who wanted to travel was going to be arrested. The ICJ say it cannot be done. But now, what of somebody who is accused of having committed the more serious crime? It's a question to be asked. It's not yet answered. It's just speculation among scholars at the moment. So I think until we have a judicial decision on that particular issue, it becomes a problem. And in the Malabo Protocol, it was framed in the way that it takes into consideration the current situation of the legal, of international law. I'm not saying that Malabo Protocol is right, but I cannot also say it's wrong because of the loopholes that I mentioned. So that is one of the, so the decision taken by these leaders, for me, the question I want to ask, why now? Russia? No. That's one aspect. Why now? Because there are people who are involved in on the ground in the fight against the so-called terrorists, and that are committing a lot of crime. And these days, people can collect information about the crime that have been committed through drones, through many other means. You know, the French, for instance, had a very serious case in Mali when a gathering for celebrating a marriage was transformed into a death row by the French because they believed that it was a gathering of terrorists, so they killed almost everybody. You understand? So this is a way of preventing what you have said, but it's also preventing their own army, protecting their own army leaders, because they are committing a lot of atrocities on the ground, you know, because of what I described earlier. You know, now between Bamako and Ségou, which is the second largest city in Mali, it's quite even impossible to move because of the pressure of the rebels group. And these rebels group are citizens of the countries. They are just because there is a circulation of small arms in the region that is widespread, so people can get Kalashnikov everywhere. And now, instead of sitting under the tree to resolve the problem, you use guns to resolve your problems. That is also the reality of the fragile state. So this is just to prevent cases to be taken at ICC against Russia and against their generals. That's why they are doing so. So that is the problem that we are facing. But maybe they don't also understand very well how the system works, because it's from now to 1 year before they are completely out of the system. And from now to next year, many things can happen. And given the current situation, I think there are still possibilities of taking some of the people who have committed those crimes to the ICC. Many possibilities.
And we had a second round of questions from, was it from this end?
Yeah.
Yes, you had his question about Nigeria and...
Yeah, the communities. You know, when you look at our social fabric in West Africa, you realize that West Africa is not just a region that is completely flat, but it's a region where movement has always been the case because of the rivers. The main rivers in Africa are in West Africa, the River Niger, Senegal, and other rivers. And it's helped over histories, the history, people have communicated. And people have created mechanism of collaboration between communities, the system that was constructed since the empires still continue to exist in our communities. Now, despite the fact that we have states, different states, because for instance, when you look at the crisis that is happening now between Niger and Nigeria, at the beginning, after the military coup, the government of Nigeria wanted to invade Niger. You know why it didn't happen? It didn't happen because the communities themselves decided that this will not happen. We will not be killing ourselves. And they started operating. When the government refused to accept a Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria coming to Niger, but the Emir of Sokoto has the facility to go to Niger, or the Emir of Kaduna going to Niger, because the relationship that they are constructed, you know, the social fabric that we have allow that possibility to exist. So people, you know, underestimate the capacity of our community to deal with our state. There are many, many, many things that our community can sort out. Many, many things that our community can sort out outside the framework of the state. Because the state that we have, it doesn't represent. You're talking about Nigeria, but look at Nigeria and Senegal. We are very far from each other. But the Muslim community of northern Nigeria is connected to a Muslim community in Senegal, you know that. And you have more than 60 million of Nigerians, which is not small, that worship a leader who is in Senegal. That tells you about the connection between, and this connection was not created by them, but it was created by religion. And up to now, when the leader of that community goes to Nigeria, it's always a big, big, big event. And sometimes that leader is even approached by leaders in Sudan, Darfur, to come and sort out their problem. Because those communities in Darfur are also connected to communities in Nigeria. So it tells you about the connection in our community. It's very, very strong. And unfortunately, people are not using them in a very effective manner, so that we still continue to have killing ourselves and having problems. The relations, the question of pastoralists and those who are doing agriculture is partly sorted out through those channels. So it's effective, but we are not using them in a very efficient manner.
Let me jump in here as moderator and maybe add something in the context of ethnicity, whether it's in Nigeria or Ethiopia. There's also the setting of the state, the modern state, in which ethnicity becomes one factor, where you have communities based on ethno-linguistic identities. In Nigeria, one of the things that the Nigerian state and constitution does is try to institutionalize that into the constitution, so that diversity doesn't become a challenge. But to some extent, that does manage diversity. But at another level, the modern state is, despite its fragility, it's still the most powerful actor in most African societies. And it also has resources, and especially in Nigeria, where a neo-patrimonial rent-seeking system is predominant, where the intersection between ethnicity, identity, and religion and competition over those resources draw lines based on political parties to compete for resources. In Nigeria, it would be oil, but I'm sure it also involves land. In Ethiopia, land is important in these types of conflicts. But then at the same time, you also have communities that transcend the state and transcend the border. And you also have institutions that are outside of the state that can mediate conflict, but also, of course, contribute to conflict as well. And so you have this setting where looking at the state is looking at part of the issue. And you can't really just say it's the problem as well. You can't villainize the state, because the state exists and it's also an important actor in human rights, for example. I just wanted to intervene in here to kind of ask the question of, so what do you do in this setting where you have borders that exist but are quasi-artificial? You can't really ignore them. And you have communities that transcend international borders. You have constitutions that don't necessarily capture the normative system of the state, which slowly creeps to Rosa's question.
Yes, that's what I
as
was
to
going to.
what does a solution look like, one in which takes all of these things into account.
Well, you raised two questions, Senghor and, but I want to start with this. You know, when you look at ECOWAS as an institution, ECOWAS was created to really sort out some of the problems that were created by the colonial system. You know, even before colonial system, people used to move in West Africa as they wanted. The biggest market in West Africa has always been Kano market. So people living everywhere in the region, going to Kano and coming back. But then you have the borders created by the British, the borders created by the Portuguese, the borders created by the French. And when we acceded to independence in the 60s, instead of dealing with those issues, we accepted the borders that they created. And we had a lot of problems because at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, there are new places that were well developed. Accra for cocoa and coffee, Côte d'Ivoire, and then in the 70s, when they discovered oil in Nigeria, Nigeria became. So people were moving from one place to another one, you know, because migration is part of our life. You understand? But the borders created by the colonial system was a problem. So two soldiers, General Gowon and General Eyadema, decided, no, we have to stop this. And then we set up a system in less than 30 years. The system was so well elaborated that we created even the concept of regional citizenship. Today, people think that the Europeans have created the concept of European citizenship. No, it's in 1982, that ECOWAS created the concept of regional citizenship. The European system started with the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. So 10 years before Maastricht, we created that concept. And the idea was, we don't want to know which nationality you are. As long as you are West African, you belong to the region, and you can move and you can do everything that you are. Now, we have an ID that allow you even don't need to go into procedures like coming into the US to go to find, you don't need. As long as you have a Nigerian ID and you come to Senegal, you can even get a job. That was ECOWAS. And it helped to sort out problems. And if you have any difficulty in protecting your right, you have ECOWAS Court of Justice. And the ECOWAS Court of Justice model is unique in the world because ECOWAS Court doesn't need, you don't need with ECOWAS Court to exhaust local remedies. Your right is violated, you go straight to ECOWAS Court. And in less than a year, your problem is sorted out. That's what ECOWAS managed to set up in many, many years. But it was not very obvious. Huh? It took many, many years to sort out. It even required the revision in 1993 of the ECOWAS Treaty to take into consideration problems that happened in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. I don't know if you know about what happened in those two countries. It was atrocities at a level that we never saw in our region. Arresting people to ask you, do you want short sleeve or long sleeve? And they cut it. Oh, most of the atrocities. But because we had that experience, we decided to find a new system that will allow individuals where your rights are violated or where you believe your rights are violated, you go straight to ECOWAS court. But now, and that is responding to one of your questions, court can make a decision, but the whole problem is the implementation of that decision. And you all know that implementation of decision on American soil, it's not obvious. The US is a country that will never implement a decision of an international court. And they said it openly. So, if powerful countries can do it, what of small countries? But despite those problems, in small countries, we manage to get solutions to some of these problems. And sometimes ECOWAS court decisions are fully implemented. And they really sort out some very critical problems in countries. The most legitimate institution at the moment in West Africa is ECOWAS Court of Justice. Anybody who has a problem, let's go to ECOWAS Court of Justice. Instead, knowing that now they are creating problems to ECOWAS Court of Justice. A few years ago, they diminished the number of judges, which means that they cannot perform as they wanted. But despite all of that, it's still making very strong decisions, very good decisions. And people are still using the system. You know, ECOWAS Court was set up in 2006, clear. But from 2006 to now, ECOWAS Court has more cases than the African Court that was set up the same year. It's even triple the cases of the court. And that tells you about its legitimacy and the fact that people believe that it can sort out problems. And it deals with all the human rights issues that people are facing. But slowly, we'll move to somewhere. Now, Senghor, yes, you know, I don't think that Senghor would have performed in another region of Africa if it was not that West Africa that big, because this is the region where people, West Africa, particularly countries that, when you look at the geography, that was in the Mali Empire, because the management of diversity helped people like Senghor to run a country. The Christian community in Senegal is just 5% of the population. We had a Christian president for 20 years, managing 95% of the population. Only, you know, that kind of management system that allow that person to be a president in our country. We also have, you know, in that region, a system through which you have religious leaders or local leaders who can play an important role in the community, who are, you know, the power that they have, even the president doesn't have that power. For instance, you follow the problem in Senegal in the 2-3 recent years. You know, when we were almost on the verge of collapsing, it's two religious leaders who call on the president and the leaders of the opposition and say, you have to stop this. It cannot work. And you have to stop this, and we ask you to stop this. And they stopped it. You know, and that's why, for me, when you look at I started by talking about the Mali Empire. It was deliberate because the system that we have and we inherited is the system that helped us to continue to survive. But we never tried to really understand very well how that system works, how that system can also be adapted to the reality of the day. But I think that more and more, for instance, Senegal has recently gone through what we call Assise Nationale de la Justice, a discussion about the judicial system of the country. One of the first things that participants at that meeting raised was the issue of the symbol of justice. Because the symbol of justice that we have at the moment in our countries doesn't represent anything for the population. It's a symbol coming from the Western world. You know, that balance. Then it has no significance for our communities. Even the way that they build the justice, the tribunals, it's come from France, in the Francophone country where I come from. You know, and people were saying why that justice system needs to be built in this certain form and in a certain place. Because for us, the place where power lies and the place where the French power lies were not the same. So we need to rethink not only the symbol, but also the mechanism that we have. And this is the time to do it. I'm not saying we need to go back. You know, the identity of tradition is not an identity of repetition. You understand? But we need to really make sure that when we use our tradition, make it a living tradition and use the mechanism that we have now. Now we are entering the world of technology and other. How do we construct our legal system now? It's a question that we have to answer because the protection of human rights will be completely different. How do we do it? These are some of the questions that we raised during that meeting. And how do we make sure that our tribunals are not dealing with everything? There are things that can be sorted out at the local level and well sorted out. Even some institutions like prisons, we never had prisons in our tradition. The prison is exile. And you go, people forget about you, maybe 20, 30 years, and then you come back and people tell you, if you want to stay, these are the conditions. But now we have prison and we even don't know how to manage those prisons. So, you see.
We have what, 6, 7 more minutes. If there are any questions, we'll take those and wrap up. Okay, Ibrahima, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for coming.